to our second Ask Me Anything session of the year. My name is Jordan Van Deen, and I'm joined tonight with my co-host Jeffrey Calvert, and we represent the CSEG Mentorship Committee. Say hello, Jeffrey.
Hello.
Hi. So we're excited tonight to discuss all things around helium exploration and production in Canada. I would argue that we have two leading pioneers in that space joining us tonight. But before we get to any formal introductions, I just have a few bookkeeping items I want to go over first. First of all, this is our most successful AMA session to date. We are excited to see these sessions keep growing in popularity and hope they continue to do so in the future. With all the Zoom fatigue around these days, we hope that you find this a valuable use of your time. I did take a look at the registration list beforehand, and I do see a very diverse group. So that's amazing. A lot of interest from all over Canada, actually, in these sessions. So yeah, if you like this one, keep joining us for the next ones. However, this is a CSEG mentorship community event. There might be a slight sway towards the geophysics aspect, but we hope to have still a general enough conversation that everyone finds it interesting. So if you haven't joined us before, the goal of these sessions is to provide everyone in attendance a really good opportunity to talk to some experts about the topic at hand. And in today's case, it's helium. So to do so, first of all, we'd love to see if you want to ask a question, if you would be kind enough to use your camera and microphone. We'd love to see your face, but we realize that not everyone is comfortable doing so. Otherwise, feel free to use the chat function. Jeff, he's going to be sort of the radio host tonight, manning the phones, getting the questions in the order that they come in. Make sure we get to everyone who has something to ask. And if you don't have any questions, yeah, feel free to sit back and relax and enjoy the conversation. So for our guest tonight, in no particular order, I'd like to introduce Dr. Brad Hayes of Petrel, Robertson. Hello, Brad.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for joining us tonight. And alongside Brad is Dr. David Johnson, CEO and Director of Imperial Helium Corp. Hello, David.
Pleasure to be here.
So in preparing for this session, I was starting to look through your biographies and write down your history and stuff like that, but both your resumes are extremely amazing and complex. So I thought maybe it's best if you guys go through, sort of tell us about your past experiences that sort of led you on this helium track today. And maybe David, I'll start with you if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. I'm a geologist, University of Calgary, started with Shell. That's where Brad and I met some 40 years ago. And then I took some time off, traveled the world, and did a PhD at Dalhousie University, went to work for ExxonMobil exploration, actually Exxon production research, and then into ExxonMobil exploration in Houston. Then I came to Calgary, was with Husky Energy here in Calgary, working Frontier and International. After that, I did a small startup. I then worked with a high net worth individual for a while in consulting with a number of his companies, Western Canada and international. Went to Kufbeck or Kuwait and spent time with Kufbeck, and then came back to Calgary. And Brad said, "Hey, Dave, let's go for coffee." And I said, "That sounds like a fun idea." And he said, "I have this project." And I said, "Well, what is it and what does it pay?" And he said, "Well, it doesn't pay." And I said, "Well, what is it?" And he said, "Does it come with an office and some space and some data to work with and one thing and another?" And Brad said, "Yes, it does all of that." He said, "It's helium." And I said, "Oh, that sounds like fun." And that's what launched off into my career or the next version of my life in helium. And that was in 2017. But maybe with that, I'll pass it over to Brad.
Yeah, Brad, please.
Okay, thanks, David and Jordan. So yeah, I'm a geologist too. I started University of Toronto with my bachelor's degree. I went straight on to do a PhD at the University of Alberta under Dr. Gordon Williams. And I worked summers at Shell. And I can't remember if I met David during a summer job or during full time, but I started full time after my PhD with Shell for a few years. Working in Canada, I moved across to Canadian Hunter and was involved in their deep basin exploration, which was a very formative experience for me. A lot of great chances to go out in the field and look at geology, to be involved with drilling and things like that. It was it was really a highlight of my early career. I left Ken Hunter in the early 90s and worked with a few small exploration companies, which were kind of trying times, but were again really good experiences in setting me up to understand how the industry works. Then in 1996, I joined my old friend Dr. Peter Putnam at Petrel Robertson Consulting, and I've been at Petrel since that time. I became president in 2007. And at Petrel, we've done consulting in geoscience consulting and engineering consulting now too, for just a huge variety of clients across the world. One of my first interactions when David and I met up again was to talk about whether Petrel could help CUFPEC out in their international exploration evaluations. Starting in about 2012 or 2013 at Petrel, we were looking for different things to do as some of our older business models started to not be as productive in the new oil patch, with foreign companies leaving, with unconventional plays becoming much more dominant. And we started to think about looking at helium. And maybe I'll just leave it at that for the moment. I don't know if you guys want to ask us anything else before we sort of launch into the helium story per se.
Sure, yeah. I think maybe set everyone off on the same basis. I think just a really good broad question to get started while people sort of get those creative juices flowing on things that they want to ask you guys is sort of, so why helium? I doubt people are still tying balloons to their lawn chairs and flying off to the stratosphere these days. So there must be another use for helium other than that. So maybe David, since you're sort of created a company in that space, maybe I'll let you sort of discuss, what is it about helium and why is there a market for it today?
Right. So helium is just in every aspect of your life. You probably just haven't recognized it as such. So helium, as you recall, is up there on the right-hand side of the periodic table, number 2, and it's inert, so it doesn't react with anything. And helium's uses really revolve around its properties. And because helium's inert and doesn't react with anything, about 30% of its uses is as a pure environment. So when you're manufacturing fiber optic cables, if you're manufacturing silicone chips, even if you're doing high temperature arc welding, that's where helium gets used. About 21% of it gets used for research, because helium actually becomes a superfluid or a superconductor, which means it's essentially frictionless when it becomes a liquid, and that's below minus 272. So it's the last thing to become liquid, about 1.15 degrees above absolute zero. And that makes it really useful for research, because we can create a pure frictionless environment on Earth. And there's some great YouTube videos about what helium does when it becomes a liquid, and they're worth looking at. But it has other uses in terms of research and in terms of medical research as well. About 21% of it gets used for cooling. So everything can actually hold heat, right? It's an intrinsic property. Helium has a huge specific heat. It can really take on a lot of heat, but it also has a large Joule-Thomson effect. So when gases expand, they cool rapidly. So its ability to take up heat and transport it away and dispel the heat is phenomenal. And that's why it is used in cooling purposes for these huge electromagnets that are used for accelerators, or if they're used for MRI machines, that it has this huge use in terms of helium. That's about another 20% of it. And then of course, helium is one of the 2 gases that we can use to lift ourselves off the Earth without propulsion. The other one is hydrogen, and it tends to be explosive. So not as good a choice. And then finally, helium is the smallest molecule. It's actually smaller than hydrogen because it has 2 neutrons. So it is a denser nucleus. It's a monoatomic gas. And so the electrons fly closer to the nucleus, and it is the smallest element. But then that makes it useful for leak detection. So anytime you're looking to start a new plant, you need to find if there's leaks in it. You can flush the system with helium and look for where leaks may be found. So it has all these uses out there industrially. And I guess the big thing is that about 70% of all these uses require pure helium, and that's 99.999% pure. So it's a refined product that get used for most of the things. That, of course, is not required for balloons, but that's how it's used and find its ways in everyday life.
Wow, that is a fantastic summary of all the powers. It's like the shrimp of Bubba Watson Shrimp Company. Like, how many uses are there for helium? That's a fantastic summary.
Hey, Jordan, there's one thing that I found really fascinating too, although I think volumetrically it's quite small, so David didn't mention it, but they actually, helium is really good to purge out rocket tanks or rocket fuel tanks.
Yep.
And so, when if you've used a tank, it can have just a really explosive mixture left in it. And so you can put helium through there and drive everything else out so that you've got a non-explosive atmosphere inside the tank. And I just remember that because one of the first helium companies that I visited that used it for applications, that they were doing that just as we visited. So.
Oh, that's quite interesting. And Brad, you're sort of talking before I ask the question, sort of your history and how you sort of got into helium. Maybe you just give us a bit more detail, last few years of, how you're helping David out with helium, and sort of give us sort of like that journey, when Imperial Helium Corporation sort of first started and where you are today.
And so in about 2012 or 2013, one of the young geologists working with Petrel, Kane Michaud, was looking for some new exploration projects to take on. And he came up with the idea of actually helium being something that probably had a pretty good future. We were starting to see back then signs that the helium market would be picking up, primarily because of all the applications that David mentioned, just expanding so greatly in today's marketplace, and they continue to expand very rapidly. And we also knew that the existing supplies were rather tenuous, and some of them in countries where there was issues about security. So I thought, well, let's have a look for helium, because we knew that back in the 1950s, I believe, there was helium actually produced in Saskatchewan. So we started to have a look at that, and we worked on and off at it for a period of several years, actually, until in early 2017, we finally managed to entice somebody with money, an investor, to actually start picking up on our plans. So we had suggestions for him. Here's a couple of places that you could go to look for helium, and here's the plan in terms of farming in and acquiring a well and acquiring some land, just as if you were doing an oil and gas play. And so we got this investor intrigued. 3 or 4 years after we started doing the work, which is kind of sometimes not unusual when you're doing something that's a bit new. And we spent a good couple of years with them. And this was the point when David came and joined us, and initially was doing, as he mentioned, some of the work for basically no pay, because there was very little money. Once we got it to a certain point, we did start making a little bit of money, because we were basically the technical team for this first company, which interestingly enough was called First Helium. David, do you want to say a bit more about what we were doing with First?
So we really got on, as Brad framed the whole thing. I think Brad's being a little bit modest about Petrel Robertson. So the things that people don't know about Petrel Robertson is that actually, in order for companies to come into existence, there are companies that places that need to incubate ideas. It's very hard just to start a company and have all the infrastructure and build all the pieces together to get to the place that you can convince investors that it's worth investing their seed capital into a company. And Petrel Robertson has actually incubated a number of companies. OSIM is one, which is a heavy oil company in Alberta, one of their success stories. And the other one would be Central European Petroleum, which was chasing up opportunities in Eastern Europe. And so that's the same thing. thing here is that Petrel Robertson took it upon themselves to incubate this idea because they saw it was a good business idea. And I got the opportunity to come in and begin to grow that first company, which became First Helium. And as companies grow, things don't always line up. And some of the investors that were involved with First Helium weren't particularly happy about the way it was going. So they came around and said, hey, First Helium is sort of up and going, but we'd like to go do it again, only we like to do it our way. And they came to myself and Brad and said, hey, would you like to do it again? And so we said, sure. And that's really where Imperial Helium was born. And we said, okay, well, they're doing it in that area of the province. Let's go to another area of the province and look for the opportunities down there. And so we went after looking for opportunities in a different space altogether.
That's a fantastic summary. Thanks for providing that. I think now's a good opportunity to Jeff to see if we have any questions from the audience.
Yeah, we have one question from Nana here, and she's just asking who owns the helium rights in Canada, and can you acquire the mineral rights in the same way as oil and gas leases? Maybe we can give this one to Brad to answer.
Okay, well, it like oil and gas rights, it varies by the jurisdiction as to exactly how you go about acquiring the rights. But for example, in Alberta, what we discovered with Imperial Helium and with First Helium is that there really wasn't a differentiation between petroleum and natural gas rights and helium rights. There just wasn't a separate assignment for them. So if you're going to look for helium in Alberta, you have to ensure that you've acquired petroleum and natural gas rights, whether you do that, well, the same way, either through freeholders or through the Crown. And in other jurisdictions, particularly Saskatchewan, where there are companies very busy in helium right now, the Saskatchewan government actually has separate helium permitting so that companies can own helium rights for a particular parcel of land that are separate from the petroleum and natural gas rights. I'm not actually aware in other parts of the country what the situation is, but I'm willing to bet that the rest of the provinces and territories are much like Alberta, where they have not segregated out the helium rights, mainly because there's just no history of helium exploration and production. But David, you might know better than I about that.
Yeah, it's and it's a really good point. So BC also has helium associated with petroleum and natural gas rights. But the rest of the country, honestly, is writing the laws on this now. Helium is one of those places which is relatively new in terms of the legislation on it. To give you an idea of how new the legislation is on it, the federal government, from a tax perspective, allows deductions for exploration, for resource exploration. And as late as 2017, the federal government had said, well, helium is not natural gas and it is not a mineral, so it's not allowed for these deductions for flow-through shares, et cetera, where the provinces do charge royalties for these things. So there's it on one hand, it's like, well, you're going to charge me a royalty. On the other hand, you say, I'm not neither. So the point is that we're in transition. Helium is coming into its own as a commodity, and a lot of the regulations are not yet lined up around it.
That's a fantastic summary. And I think I just have a quick follow-up to that. And you sort of mentioned the royalty structure. Has that sort of been decided? There's a lengthy history of oil and gas production in Alberta and Saskatchewan, BC, and the royalty structures that go with it. Is there an accommodating royalty structure that you work with? And how has that sort of been decided in the last few years?
I'll just put in that early on, when we were doing our first work in Alberta, there was not any recognition of helium in Alberta. And so for a while there, we were working the prospects and and pitching to people based on there being no royalty on the helium production. I think that has changed, so I'll hand it over to David on
Yeah,
the current
we
information.
actually went to the Alberta government and said, will you validate that concept? And they did. They validated that there was no royalty on helium. And then in 2021, the province came out and said, okay, we're establishing a royalty structure on helium rather than leaving it so that industry doesn't know if one's coming in the future or not. They established a royalty. It's 4.25% on Crown lands. On freehold lands, it of course is left open to the landowners, as it is on First Nations lands as well. So that's the way it is in Alberta. In BC, in BC, they have a more complicated royalty structure, and as Brad indicated, Saskatchewan has a different royalty structure as well. I don't believe Manitoba has a royalty structure on helium that I know of yet, and I'm not clear on Ontario or Quebec either.
And
yeah, I'm not sure about Manitoba. I know that they have been promoting, through their regulator, the potential to explore for helium, but I've not heard whether there's actually a royalty.
Anything in the Northwest Territories with the federal lands?
Not that I'm aware of. The Northwest Territories government, now that they have devolved from federal government control, are actually very keen on developing subsurface resources. And we've done a number of projects for them in the last few years, and they're interested right now in understanding whether there is any helium potential in the Northwest Territories. But I think that if we give them a report that says, yes, there is some helium potential, they may start moving down the road towards regulations and royalties and so on.
Maybe a little bit of an aside. It sounds like helium production, is geology specific. Areas that have oil and gas production in the past seem to have potential for helium. Maybe you can sort of go over, what's required to produce helium, go through those steps. What makes it different from oil and gas production in the first place, and what are the challenges associated with that? And maybe since you're speaking last, Brad, I'll pass that over to you, David.
Sure. Helium is generated by the decay of radiogenic elements in the crust. And so uranium and thorium primarily. And an alpha particle gets thrown out as a product of fission, and it grabs 2 electrons, and then it begins to migrate upwards. And as it migrates upward, it bumps into hydrocarbons and other gases that are migrating along. And then it becomes entrapped where there are seals that are fine enough to hold back, the smallest molecule. So it's trapped as a subsurface gas, like any subsurface gas. So the exploration for it from a subsurface perspective is very, very much like that for hydrocarbons. We're looking for traps in the earth that will, and it really has to do with, are there preferred migration areas or concentration areas around helium? And for those people that have looked, there seems to be a lot of nitrogen associated with the gas. I'll step back from it in terms of any secret sauce or from an exploration perspective, but yeah, we're exploring the same way you would for natural gas. So the same elements are involved. It has to do with the use of seismic, the use of petrophysics, the use of all the whole tool set in terms of the same way you would look for a hydrocarbon systems analysis. You're doing the same thing for a helium systems analysis in a basin and looking for helium rather.
Yes.
Production of it is very much the same. The trick is really around the refining of it, in that helium separators require a gas helium separation really is a 2-part thing. First, there's a filtration process, which uses something called a molecular sieve, which is really just a filter. That's all it is. It's a membrane that will only let helium through. And like all sieves, they leak. And then the second process is uses to refine it to really pure helium. You can use cryogenics, or you can use something called vacuum swing pressure adsorption. And this is really uses clays charged with electricity. It's like rubbing a balloon on your arm. You basically pass the gas through the chamber. Anything that carries a charge adsorbs. Helium doesn't. So it rises to the top of the chamber and you take off the helium on the top. And that's how you get to pure helium. So it's not a complicated process.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to add to David's explanation of the exploration. I just finished the other day in my petroleum geology course in Mount Royal, talking about the basics of exploration, of looking for source rock, reservoir rock, traps, and seals. And as David said, all the same concepts are there for helium exploration. Just the source rocks are different. And there are some particular characteristics we look for in some of the other areas like the seal, but nevertheless the mindset, the process is pretty much exactly the same.
Fantastic. So I just looked at the clock. We're sort of about the halfway point. I just want to reach out to anyone in the audience. Yeah, if you guys do have any questions, feel free to ask them now. Sort of on that similar vein about the geology. So this is the high radioactive rocks. I was just thinking top of my head, like the Canadian Shield out east, highly probably radioactive, but it probably does not have the shield, or sorry, the seal to make it useful for exploration. Would you sort of agree with that, Brad?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most of the spots that we're looking for that are productive right now in Western Canada for helium have a pretty close association with those same Precambrian shield rocks, simply that they're buried, 1,500, 2,500, 3,000 meters deep in the Western Canada Sedimentary Basin. But we're generally looking to those rocks or the sediments like the granite wash that are derived from them as being our helium sources. So the closer we can get to that type of source rock, the more likelihood we are to get decent helium concentrations.
Excellent. Jeff, I'll ask you if you have any questions from the audience.
Yeah, so I have two questions that I'm gonna try to tie into one here. The first one's from Zach, and he's just asking if you expect to see a significant growth in helium demand over the next few years. And then the second part asked by Thomas is, do you think Canada could be a world leader in exporting helium? So maybe we can start with David.
Sure. Absolutely. The demand for helium is growing and is expected to grow around sort of the 6 to 11% kind of range over the next 3 to 5 years. And so there really is going to be a significant increase in demand. The world uses about 6 billion cubic feet of helium a year right now. And that demand, that charge for that demand really is, it's a combination of all the sectors that I mentioned. Some of them are growing a little bit bigger in terms of the cooling and the pure applications. Certainly rocketry, as Brad mentioned, is huge. Quantum computing is huge. Anything around chip manufacturing is huge. We're seeing demand from airbag companies. Samsung setting up a plant down in Texas, right next to where Tesla's building a plant. I mean, there's just large demand that's growing. One of the challenges, though, around this is that helium is a lot like liquid natural gas. So it can't be transported or stored efficiently in large volumes because of its properties. So the guys down in Australia pay way more for their gas because it gets sold to China. The guys in Europe sell a lot for their gas because it's all coming from Eastern Europe. We can't get $5 for our gas in Canada because there's so much of it produced in the Permian Basin. It's the same problem. To transport liquid helium, it gets transported in something called an ISO container, which keeps the helium liquid at minus 272, but it can only do it for 42 days, and then it begins to vent. And what this gives rise to is we can't there is localization of the markets around the world. So North America is a marketplace. So Canada, the big influence for us is that the United States used to be the large supplier for the globe as a whole, primarily out of Texas and other parts in the United States. The Bureau of Land Management that used to do that stopped selling helium to the world commercially in 2018. And the end result of that was they took 2.1 billion cubic feet a year out of the marketplace. So yeah, there's a huge opportunity for Canada in terms of backfilling that loss to the marketplace. That being said, there are other places in the world like Russia that is bringing on gas. The other places are really out of Qatar and Algeria, and both Qatar and Algeria are partnered with ExxonMobil in that. So the supply of gas to the world is really dominated by a small group of players. I could go on about this forever, so I'll stop it there and say, yeah, Canada can contribute. Brad, I know you have a lot to say on this. So,
well, you've picked up all the good stuff, but some of the the international suppliers that David mentioned, like Qatar and Russia in particular, are producing helium from very, very large gas processing plants, and in the case of Qatar, LNG export facilities. So they have very, very low concentrations of helium, but they're processing so much gas at one spot that they can still make a business out of supplying a bunch of helium there, just because of the enormous quantities of gas that go through. In Canada, we've been focused more on finding richer deposits of helium. And when I say richer, we're talking about, between 0.4 and maybe 1% helium in the gas stream is a pretty typical concentration to find. And we're looking to make our business simply out of producing and refining just that helium. As David mentioned before, particularly most of the current production in Canada comes with high inert gases like nitrogen that really don't have any value. So we have to make our money just off of the helium. In the future for Canada, there may be opportunities if we get enough LNG capacity going off of the West Coast that we could perhaps play some of that same game that Qatar plays and take a very low concentration of helium through a very large gas stream and do something there. So, but we've got exciting potential, I think, and say right now it's focused in a relatively small part of Western Canada. We're really just starting to look at expanding that. Excellent.
Jeff, it sounds like the questions are coming in pretty quickly here. Maybe we'll hit a few more from the audience.
Yeah, we had a question for Mike, just about quantifying the dollar amount of this prize. So what is the commodity price for helium these days, and where do you think it's going to head in the next couple of years?
I'll take a crack at this, Brad.
No, that's a David question. But well, I'll tell you what. When we started, really seriously looking at things at Petrel, what we found was that there is not a commodity market for helium. There's not an exchange like West Texas or Henry Hub or something like that your commodity goes through and gets a regular pricing. Most of the helium is purchased on individual contracts, and people aren't obliged to tell us what their pricing is. We did have some data from those last strategic reserve auctions in the United States that David mentioned, and the final price there was about $200 US.
No, 337 per 1,000 cubic feet.
Okay, so that pretty hefty price. People run their economics on, well, I don't know what people use, but I think that anywhere between $200 Canadian at the low end and probably $500 or $600 Canadian at the high end in terms of what you might get for 1,000 cubic feet of helium. So you're talking about 100 times the value of regular natural gas. We've heard stories of individual contracts where the pricing's just gone through the roof, but that's like anything. If people need a commodity at a certain time, they sometimes have to pay a lot more money for it.
For sure. Did you have anything to add, David?
Yeah. So at the 6 billion mark, and 350 US, you're talking about a $2 trillion market. So that's sort of raw. That's sort of a raw helium price. So if you go to Canadian Tire and if you buy one of those little cans to fill up balloons with, which is raw helium, that translates to $4,000 a thousand cubic feet. All right, so roughly 100 times. So you're talking about a market that is someplace between $2 and $20 trillion. That's sort of the global market price for helium. I mean, it's a significant market. It really is.
So it definitely seems like it's lucrative. Can you sort of talk about how competitive it is in Canada for production for companies like yourself, David?
Yeah, sure. So in Canada, there are currently 2 helium producers. One is Thor, and the other one is North American Helium. Now, the Whale Group was on production in partnership with Lind in the Battleford Creek area of Saskatchewan for a number of years, but that is largely shut in right now. What we see in the exploration marketplace right now is there's probably 7 to 10 players that are emerging as small players in the marketplace, moving forward to try and come on stream and become production players in Canada, out of Canada right now, or sort of not Canada and North America. There are opportunities across North America to grow opportunities. But really, there's just the 2 that are the current producers in Canada. Brad?
Yeah, and I was just going to add that it's becoming more important internationally. I mean, we've got a culture in North America of innovative exploration, and we've got this huge nucleus even now of companies and people and ideas. And so we tend to lead the way, and such is the case right now. But internationally, there are interesting ventures. There's a company called Helium One that's traded on the London Stock Exchange, and they're exploring for helium in the African River Valley in Tanzania. And it's very interesting there. They've got helium shows of up to 10% concentration of helium, but their shows are seeps actually at the surface. They've drilled one well without a great deal of success.
I don't know if it's just me, but I think Brad has a little internet hiccup. Just too bad, because it's right. It sounded very interesting part.
So yeah, Helium One is looking in Tanzania. That is out there. There's Renergen, which is working with an Astroblem in South Africa, which it looks to be a huge deposit. There is helium around the world in a number of settings associated with hydrocarbons as well in other places, and those are all growing as well. So there's a lot of small companies that are coming into the market, seeing the opportunity, seeing the value that's there, and trying to move forward. And the real challenge is to move it to a place where it grows. A couple of comments about the market. The market is dominated by, the market grew up out of the United States, selling out of Texas. And really it was the Bureau of Land Management that was saying it became dominated by 4 major players. So Praxair, Air Liquide, Lind, and Air Products. These are the big suppliers. And they were buying it primarily out of the Bureau of Land Management, marketing it around the world. Now, as the market is growing, essentially, what we're seeing now is that there's smaller players that are coming to fill in the void created by the Bureau of Land Management. And Lind is working with some of those players. So I think it's Desert Mountain and North American Helium that have deals with some of these players. And other people like ourselves are setting ourselves up to refine helium by ourselves, because it is tractable to do so, and then begin to sell it to other smaller players such as Uniper, Awatani, Matheson. There are a number of companies that are looking to grow into the commercial gas space, the helium gas space globally. and that's happening, as I said, globally. I think if we look at the world on the largest scale, it may be that countries that are established around national oil companies. So Algeria, it's Sonatrach partnered with ExxonMobil. In Qatar, it's the Qatar National that's partnered with ExxonMobil. In Amur, it's oh shoot, not Rosgas, but anyway, I've forgotten the name of the Russian national gas company. Anyway, but they're partnered with Air Products to produce the natural gas, and you'll see that out in other parts of the world. In North America, in which is far more free market oriented, there's numbers of small companies like ourselves that are working to find helium resources, and will be supplying those into essentially the suite of players that there are in the gas market space. So North America looks to become more the competitive free market environment, where the world as a whole may become more dominated by the national oil companies or national companies. My thoughts.
Yeah, but as your and Brad's point, there's a huge emphasis on location. Transportation probably makes up for a huge portion of the costs. So you have these huge helium super majors, but there's always going to be a place just to reduce those transportation costs. It looks like we have a couple more questions that we should try to get to. Jeff, who's next?
Yeah, we have a geology-centered question from Wayne here. He's thinking, what about searching sandstone basins, such as the Precambrian Athabasca Sandstone Basin in northern Saskatchewan? This basin has the richest uranium-bearing sandstones in the world. Can you capture helium from the degradation of the uranium in the sandstones? Maybe we can give this one to Brad to start off, unless David already has an idea about this.
Oh, I want to hear Brad's answer.
Well, let's hope my internet stays connected long enough for me to answer this time. So in the Athabasca Basin, that is really interesting. You're right. You've got some potential reservoir. You've got great potential source rocks. I think the problem there is probably seal for the most part. I'm not, a lot of that Athabasca sandstone is at surface, or certainly doesn't have the quality of seal that would be required to trap significant volumes of helium. Even if you've got a lot of uranium, it's radioactive decay. It takes a really long time to accumulate the helium. So we usually do look for helium in older rocks like that, where there's been a long period of time for the helium to accumulate, but we do need the really effective seal. And my first thought there would be, don't see the seal for that basin.
David, do you have anything to add to that comment, or did Brad capture it pretty well?
No, I think that's right. What I'd say is that so a way back now, I spent time researching seals with Exxon Production Research, and really, once you get above about 15% silt, it's not going to hold anything. But that doesn't mean there aren't good shales that will hold back helium. Certainly, some of the really deep water shales that you find in the Devonian are extremely pure and can provide superior seals.
Excellent. There was a question that caught my eye a bit earlier ago, and it actually was sort of ties it to mentorship, because this is sort of a mentorship committee. There's this asking sort of about, you guys work together, I think it was at Shell, if I heard correctly. Just your experiences, networking, keeping in touch with people you work with and stuff like that, and like sort of how it's sort of grown your careers. Maybe if you can sort of think about some prior experiences, this one included, on how networking has sort of helped your career. And yeah, Brad, maybe I'll start with you.
Well, there's no doubt that it really doesn't matter what age you are, or even what career you're in, that networking is incredibly valuable. In Western Canada, if you were planning to work out of this part of the world. I mean, there's a very, very distinct community of geoscientists and engineers. We've got all sorts of great organizations that bring us together to talk about a lot of different things, the CSEG, the CSPG, Canadian Society of Unconventional Resources, the SPE. I mean, there are all sorts of opportunities in those organizations, not only to learn, but to get together with people. I mean, basically any topic of interest where you can meet one-on-one and talk with people and look for ideas and so on is really important. In the last 5 or 6 years, as it's become more difficult for people with all experience levels, from new graduates through to very experienced people, to land a job in whether it's oil or gas or helium or lithium or whatever. Yeah, networking is super important. And I get people calling me up from all, sometimes they know me. Sometimes it's like David and I going for a coffee and reestablishing our network. Other times it's people basically calling me out of the blue because they've seen me on LinkedIn or something like that, and just ask to have a coffee and just tell me what they're up to and what what they'd like to do, and maybe look for any kind of advice and other folks to talk to. And it's not very often I can say, hey, I've got this great idea, let's work on this together, like I eventually did with David. But still, you talk to enough people and something's going to shake out, whether it's right now or a little bit down the road. Mm-hmm. So I think the networking is so critical, and it doesn't have to be through the professional societies is one place to kind of meet people, but even personal contacts. Like my younger son's has a number of friends that he knew in high school that are now training or geologists in training, and I hear from some number of them that that I knew because they're good networkers, and they've reached out and to anybody that they know that can give them a hand, and say more power to them. That's a great idea.
And David, I'm sure you would echo Brad's comments, but I'm just wondering if you have anything to add, the importance of networking.
Yeah, I'm going to wax a little philosophical and say, look, it's about people. At the end of the day, you sit with your friends and you talk about the conquers and the conquests and the stories and sharing the journey with people is just pivotal. It makes the difference. The projects are important, absolutely, in terms of achieving things, but it's about the people. It's about the people that you work with. It's been a great pleasure to work with Brad again after, we didn't really work together at Shell. We knew each other at Shell because we started sort of the same years, and we were part of a group of 20 people, but those 20 people all bump into each other again and still bump into each other. And that's true for every organization that I've had the pleasure to work with. Those relationships are all pivotal, and they're the texture of life, and they're the stuff of life in the end. Once all the projects are done and the money's been made or not made or lost or whatever, it's you wouldn't believe. Do you remember the time? And you remember so and so, and that's it. That's where the real value is, and in all those journeys and all those shared times. And I just can't say enough. Get out there, be part of the societies, be part of the groups, work, play, embrace it, because it's important. It really is.
It used to be when David and I started out that oil companies would be touring around the country and hiring summer students far and wide, and it kind of got you into things. It's more challenging for people now. There's not nearly as many positions. There's still some companies that are really good about hiring some summer students, but it isn't the the volume of people that it used to be. So it becomes even more important to really hunt down those individual contacts. And I'd have to say, if I look around the joint Petrel Imperial Helium office, because we do share office space right now, most of the people that are working in there came in through networking. They didn't come in through kind of cold call applications or something like that. They were people that we had worked with before that we knew could do a good job, or they're people recommended by our friends, basically. So super, super important.
Mm-hmm. You had a comment that I sort of wanted to follow up, and I think it's for the benefit of a lot of people in the audience right now. Is this you said a lot of people reach out to you out of the blue through LinkedIn and stuff like that, and I feel, you know, some of the younger crowd, either if they're in school or young professionals, you know, might not be comfortable just reaching out to someone to ask, you know, more questions about, you know, their field of expertise. I hope I don't ruin your inbox about people just cold emailing you now, but like, can you sort of talk to how you view people reaching out to you who you may not have known otherwise to ask, you know, either for a coffee or something like that? And Brad, since it was your comment, maybe I'll let you answer that.
Sure. Well, I do encourage people to do that. I mean, the particularly the younger people I know, the ones that have got the best jobs that I've seen are the ones that are the best networkers. And most of them have done exactly that. They've reached out, whether they, you know, there's one fellow that's got a great job now that I know, and hey, I ran into him when he was like 12 years old refereeing hockey, and he maintained the relationship over time. And you know, he was a summer student for me one year, and then he just grew it into other things. And I know I certainly wasn't the only person he talked to. He's a very, very good networker, reaching out to people. And I think, you know, I'm always amenable to chatting with people. I enjoy chatting with people. And sometimes, you know, from my selfish perspective, I find people that might have something, you know, to offer us on a particular project, or just you know, be there at the right time when I need something done. So if I've got time to talk to people, I certainly will respond to cold calls. Yeah, there's only so many hours in the day to have coffee, and only so much coffee I can drink. But you know, it's I would encourage people to do it. And there's lots of other, you know, particularly if you look at who's, you know, who's giving talks, or who's who's volunteering with the societies like CSPG, or CGEF was one I forgot to mention before, but David's been active with CGEF. You know, look to the people that are giving their time already, and you might find them to be particularly receptive to more conversations.
Excellent. And David, do you have any follow-up or anything to comment on regarding that?
Yeah, I do. Just in general, make the call. Sort of after a lifetime of wandering the globe and working around the world, 90% of the people in the world really just want to meet, make friends, and do their trade and commerce thing and raise their families, and they're well hailed and well met. And so in general, that's what you can expect to meet. Most people are happy to entertain a call, or unless they're oversubscribed or over busy, or they've got too much going on, or, you know, in general, that's been my experience. So yeah, I expect my inbox will get swamped, and please understand if I get a little busy, but regardless of who it is that you know, reach out, make that contact. Anybody who's been in a job search, and so, you know, I have been in many, and I've had good things, and I've been laid off, and I've gone through that whole meal. That's part of the journey. Pride is the first casualty. Just let it go. Say hello. It's important.
That's great advice. So we only have about 5 or 6 more minutes. I do have a topic that I sort of want to address, and maybe we'll wrap up with that. But you know, it seems to me helium is a really interesting industry. If you're a geologist or geophysicist, and for whatever reason your values, you know, don't necessarily align with oil and gas exploration, you know, there could be a ESG component to helium that's different than oil and gas. Let's just say I'm fascinated in helium exploration. Like, do you have any resources or anything like that that anyone listening can sort of follow up on, or, you know, what avenues, if they wanted to become more knowledgeable, maybe be more hireable to any company that's exploring or producing helium?
In general terms, I would always say that if you want to call up David or I and talk about helium, it's a really good idea to come in with some knowledge. You know, you've done your homework. You know you know why you think helium's interesting. You've got a couple of good questions for us as to, and maybe you know the answers to those questions already, but you still got a couple of questions for us about the finer points of looking for helium. And you know, you said something interesting about values and that. I mean, if there are people that would like to feel it's a better thing to explore for helium than to explore for oil and gas, let's say, in today's world where we are concerned with emissions, that's all good, and that's a fine, you know, that's a fine value to have. It will make you somewhat less flexible and perhaps restrict your marketability, because you know, a lot of helium that is produced does come with oil and gas. If you're just saying, I only want to look for that green helium, well, that's fine, but you're restricting your chances.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah, Jordan, I'll take a little bit broader approach to it and say, I think the downturn, energy transition is going to happen. It is. Absolutely. That's on the way. The world has spoken. We're on our way. That being said, for geoscientists out there looking to be involved with subsurface extractive industries, there's a lot of work to be done. Whether it's lithium or it's geothermal or it's helium, you know, all the properties and everything that needs to be learned in order to be involved with those extractive industries are important, and understanding the aquifers and the flow systems and the flow mechanisms and the structures, the reservoirs, the seals, the traps, all those pieces are all critical to all of those extractive industries. So there's huge opportunities out there. We're in a stage of transition. We're just beginning to move. So if people are looking towards the future and wondering where things are going to be, or if there's even a job in this, there is. And there's portability between these two, because the principles around each one of those extractive industries are pretty much the same from the geological perspective. The more you know, and the more you can relate what you know to the basics and apply that across disciplines, the better you'll be able to be employed all through life, but the more you're going to enjoy the journey and have fun with the opportunities that are out there.
Fantastic. I think that's a really good point to end the conversation. I think it's been a very interesting conversation that we did have. Just a couple of things before I press the close button. If you like this event and are looking for more, we do have one planned. I think we're aiming for March. So keep an eye out on our LinkedIn page, the CSEG Mentorship on LinkedIn. Feel free to share with your friends as well. If you have any feedback for us, you should have our emails from the meeting invite that we sent out. Email myself or Jeff with any feedback. We'll take all criticism happily. And then last but not least, just a huge thanks to our guests, David and Brad. Just awesome insight into helium industry and its development and future in Canada. So thank you. Thank you very much for taking your time out and speaking to us today.
Great pleasure. Thank you so much.
My pleasure too.
Awesome. And with that, I will conclude today's AMA session. Thank you very much.